It was a slow morning in the little cafe on Main Street, the kind of place where people came not for fancy meals but for warmth, for comfort, for the smell of coffee and the sound of old laughter. Emily wiped the counter with a worn towel, her hands moving out of habit. She had worked there for 3 years, always on time, always polite, and always invisible. To most people, she was just the waitress with brown hair and tired eyes. Outside, the street buzzed with life, buses roared past, children laughed on their way to school, but inside, time moved slower. The soft hum of the refrigerator and the hiss of the coffee machine were the cafe's only heartbeat. Near the far wall stood an old upright piano, painted white long ago but now chipped and dull. No one had played it for years. Emily often glanced at it between orders, her heart aching a little every time, as if the keys were calling to her when she was a child. Her father had taught her a few notes on a broken keyboard they found at a thrift store. She had fallen in love with music then, the way melodies could speak when words could not. But after her father died and bills started piling up, she stopped playing. She had to grow up fast, find work, pay rent, survive. The cafe was her world now. A small one, but it was safe. Her coworker Lisa often teased her, saying, "You stare at that piano like it's your long-lost boyfriend." Emily just smiled and shook her head. "It's nothing," she'd say. But inside she knew it wasn't nothing. It was everything she'd lost and everything she still dreamed about. That morning was no different. A group of office workers sat by the window, tapping on laptops. An old couple shared toast quietly, and a few students chatted over coffee. Emily served them with a smile. Even when her feet ached and her back hurt, she always smiled. That was part of the job. Keep smiling even when they don't notice, and her manager liked to say. But there was one thing she noticed that others didn't: how people's moods changed with sound. The way soft music in the background could make even a rainy day feel warm. Sometimes, when the cafe was empty, she'd hum quietly as she wiped tables, and for a few moments the world felt lighter. That day, the owner's radio was broken, and the cafe felt too quiet, too empty of soul. Emily kept glancing at the piano, her heart beating faster each time. She imagined herself walking over, sitting down and pressing one key, just one. She wondered if it would still make a sound. The doorbell chimed, breaking her thoughts. A tall man in a long coat entered, shaking the rain from his hat. He looked older, maybe in his 60s, with silver hair and eyes that noticed things. He smiled at her kindly. "Coffee, please, Black," he said. His voice deep but gentle. She nodded and hurried to prepare it. As she placed the cup before him, he looked around the cafe, his gaze pausing on the piano. "Does anyone ever play that?" he asked casually. Emily shook her head. "No, sir. It's just decoration now." He smiled faintly. "Shame. A piano should never be silent." His words stayed in her mind all morning, like a song she couldn't stop humming. When the lunch rush came, she moved quickly, taking orders, serving meals, refilling cups. But every time she passed the piano, her eyes lingered, and her heart whispered, "What if?" Later that afternoon, when the customers thinned out and sunlight spilled through the windows, the cafe felt still again. She was alone behind the counter, cleaning up. The old man had left hours ago, but his words echoed in her ears. She walked toward the piano, slowly, almost afraid of her own courage. Her hand reached out, fingertips brushing the dusty surface. A shiver ran through her. She sat down carefully. The stool creaked beneath her. She pressed one key. The sound that came out was faint, slightly out of tune, but beautiful, real for a moment. She forgot everything, the bills, the long hours, the sore feet, even the loneliness. It was just her and the music she thought she'd lost. She played a few more notes, clumsy but heartfelt, a melody from her childhood, her father's favorite tune. The cafe around her seemed to fade, replaced by memories of him humming beside her as she learned. Tears filled her eyes. She smiled through them, realizing that she hadn't really lost music. It had just been waiting for her to find it again. She didn't know that this small, quiet moment, a waitress touching an old piano, would soon change everything. But for now, she just kept playing, softly, shyly, beautifully. In the little cafe on Main Street the next day, the rain was still falling softly over Main Street, a thin mist that made everything look like a dream. Emily came to the cafe early, as she always did, but something about the air felt different. The piano in the corner seemed to be watching her, almost alive. She tried to ignore it, busying herself with coffee cups and napkins, yet her heart kept beating to the rhythm of the song she had played the night before. By noon, the cafe was full, laughter mixed with the smell of fresh pastries. Emily moved between tables with her usual quiet grace, but she was distracted. Her thoughts kept wandering back to the keys. She didn't know anyone had noticed her small act of courage, but someone had. The old man from yesterday was back, sitting in the same seat near the window, his coat still damp from the drizzle, his eyes still sharp and kind. When Emily brought him his coffee, he looked up and smiled. "Did you play the piano last night?" he asked, his tone gentle but knowing. She froze, the tray almost slipping from her hand. "How did you?" she whispered. He chuckled softly. "I came back after closing. I forgot my umbrella. But I heard something beautiful." His words made her blush. She shook her head. "It was nothing. Just a few wrong notes." "No," he said, "it wasn't wrong. It was honest." His words settled deep in her chest. Warming a place she thought had long gone cold, she didn't know what to say, so she just nodded and went back to work. But now every sound in the cafe felt like part of a larger melody. The clink of cups, the hiss of steam, the hum of conversations. Everything had rhythm, everything was music. Hours passed, and the rain grew heavier. Most customers left early, but a small group of regulars stayed, joking and talking loudly. The old man kept sipping his coffee, his eyes occasionally glancing at the piano. When lightning flashed outside, the lights in the cafe flickered once, twice, then went out completely. A murmur rose through the room. "Oh, great. Power's gone," someone complained. The owner tried switching the breakers, but nothing worked. The cafe dimmed to a warm orange glow from candles. The sound of rain tapping the windows filled the silence. "Well," the old man said, smiling, "we could use a little music to pass the time." Some customers laughed. Others nodded. "We don't have a speaker," the owner said. "And the radio's dead." The old man's gaze turned toward Emily. His smile deepened. "Maybe we don't need one." Emily froze where she stood. "Me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Everyone looked at her now, some curious, some amused. Lisa, her co-worker, grinned. "Come on, Em, play something. You're always staring at that thing anyway." The crowd laughed lightly, and her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. I can't. I haven't played in years," she said quickly. "Besides, I'm just a waitress." But the old man's words came again, calm and firm. "No one is just anything, not when there's music inside them." The cafe fell silent, waiting. The rain softened outside, like even the storm was listening. Emily felt her legs move before her mind agreed. She walked to the piano slowly, heart thudding, fingers trembling. She sat down. The old stool creaked beneath her weight. For a long second she stared at the keys, dusty, yellowed, uneven. The candlelight made them glow faintly. She could feel everyone's eyes on her. The sound of her heartbeat was louder than the rain, and then she pressed one key. The note rang out, low, soft, pure. Something inside her cracked open. She began to play, not perfectly, not smoothly, but with everything she had. The melody rose and fell like a whisper, a confession. Every note was a memory, her father teaching her a song, her mother's humming, her own laughter as a child. She closed her eyes, forgetting the cafe, the people, the storm, forgetting everything but the sound. Her fingers moved with instinct, as if they'd never stopped when she finished. The silence was deeper than before, then came a soft clap, then another. Until the whole cafe was applauding, someone shouted, "Play another!" And for the first time in years, Emily smiled. Not the polite smile she gave to customers, but a real one, full of light and life. The old man stood and walked toward her, his expression filled with pride. "You've got a gift," he said quietly. "Don't hide it again." She tried to reply, but emotion caught in her throat. She could only nod, tears glimmering in her eyes. As the lights flickered back on, the customers cheered. The power had returned, but no one noticed. They were too busy talking about the waitress who played like a dream. Outside, the rain stopped, the clouds parted, and a single ray of sunlight touched the piano through the window. Emily looked at it and whispered to herself, "Maybe this is just the beginning." The next morning, sunlight spilled through the cafe windows, golden and soft, turning the steam from fresh coffee into tiny clouds that danced above each cup. Emily walked in quietly, her apron folded neatly in her hands. Everything looked the same. The smell of pastries, the chatter of early customers, the same piano in the corner. Yet somehow nothing felt the same anymore. Word had spread overnight, it always did in a small town. By morning, everyone seemed to know about the waitress who played the piano when the lights went out. Some laughed it off as gossip. Others came just to see if it was true. Emily tried to ignore the whispers, but when she passed a group of teenagers near the counter, she heard one of them say, "That's her, right? The one who played like a movie scene," and her cheeks flushed. Lisa noticed and bumped her shoulder playfully. "You're famous now," she teased. "Better start charging extra for your autograph." Emily laughed softly but shook her head. "Don't start that," she said. "It was just one time, but deep down, a small spark of pride warmed her heart. She had never been someone before. She had always just been part of the background. Now for once, people noticed her, not for the plates she carried, but for the music she played. When the cafe owner, Mrs. Green, came out from the back, she had her phone in her hand. "Emily," she said with a smile, "you're all over town Facebook groups. People are calling this place the cafe with the pianist Waitress." Emily groaned, hiding her face in her apron. "Oh no, please don't tell me someone recorded it." Mrs. Green chuckled. "Oh honey, 3 people did." By mid-morning, the cafe was busier than ever. Customers came not just for coffee, but for her. Some even asked, "Will you play again today?" Emily's hands fidgeted every time someone asked. She wasn't ready. She didn't even know if she could repeat what she'd done. Last night had felt like magic. A moment that happened once because it had to. She was afraid that if she tried again, it would lose its meaning. Then the doorbell chimed, and the old man walked in again, raincoat gone, replaced by a brown suit that made him look like he'd stepped out of an old movie. He nodded at her and took his usual seat. She brought him coffee before he could ask. "You came back," she said softly. He smiled. "Of course I did, I told you. A piano should never be silent." He gestured toward the instrument. "Play again," he said simply. She froze. "Now? In front of everyone?" He nodded. "Exactly, in front of everyone." "But what if I mess up?" she whispered. "Then they'll hear your honesty," he said. "And that's what people remember." Emily looked around. Every table was full. People were chatting, laughing, tapping their phones. The noise felt overwhelming. Her chest tightened with nerves, but when she looked at the piano, it seemed to call her again. Soft and steady, she took a deep breath, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked toward it. The sound of her footsteps quieted the room. Cups paused mid-air. A few people exchanged glances, then silence. She sat down and placed her fingers on the keys. Her hands trembled for a moment, then she began to play. The first few notes were shaky, uncertain, but soon they found their rhythm. Her music flowed like morning light. Gentle, patient, full of feeling. The melody wasn't from any song she knew. It came from somewhere inside her, rising and falling like a heartbeat. The world outside faded, no clinking dishes, no chatter, just music, pure and raw. Her eyes closed, and she let the sound tell her story. Of long shifts, of quiet dreams, of missing her father's voice, of hope that refused to die. When she opened her eyes, the cafe was utterly silent. Even the espresso machine had stopped hissing. A tear slipped down the cheek of one woman near the door. Another man stood just to clap. Soon the whole cafe followed. Applause filled the small room, warm and real. Emily sat frozen, overwhelmed. The old man stood too, pride shining in his eyes. He waited until the applause faded, then said loudly, "Her name is Emily, remember it. Because someday you'll hear it again." The crowd laughed and clapped harder. She covered her face, half embarrassed, half glowing. When the cafe finally quieted down, the old man leaned toward her and said, "I want you to meet someone. A friend of mine runs a small studio in the city. He helps musicians record their first songs." Her eyes widened. "Me? I can't just leave work," he smiled. "You don't have to decide now, but think about it. This is your moment." That night, after closing, Emily sat again at the piano. Alone, the cafe lights dimmed. Her reflection in the glossy keys looked different. Stronger. Braver, she whispered to herself. Maybe I'm not just a waitress anymore. And for the first time in years, she believed it. She played one last soft note before leaving, unaware that her story and her music had just begun to travel far beyond Main Street. The next weekend arrived with clear skies and warm sunlight that glowed across Main Street. The cafe was busier than ever. A line stretched out the door, and laughter filled the air like music itself. But the loudest sound wasn't from the chatter or the clinking dishes. It was from the small white piano in the corner. The one that used to be silent. Emily sat there again, her fingers dancing across the keys, a melody flowing soft and full of emotion. She hadn't planned to play that day. But when a group of tourists came in asking, "Is this the place with the waitress who plays?" she didn't have the heart to say no, she played instead. And just like that, the cafe turned into something else entirely. It wasn't just a place for coffee anymore. It was a place for stories. Mrs. Green, the owner, beamed from behind the counter. "You see that?" she said proudly to Lisa. "That's the sound of business booming." Lisa nodded with a grin. Yeah, and the sound of Emily finally smiling. Emily did smile, but not because of fame or applause. It was because, for the first time in years, she felt alive again. Every note she played seemed to remind her of who she used to be, and who she could still become. After her song ended, customers clapped. Some even asked if she taught piano. One man left a business card that read Sound and Soul Studio. Downtown, she slipped it into her pocket, unsure what to do later that evening. When the crowd left and the cafe quieted, she sat alone at a corner table, the card on the counter in front of her. That was when the old man appeared again, walking in just before closing time. His kind eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "You did well," he said softly. "You brought life to this place," Emily smiled shyly. "I don't know what came over me. It just felt right," he nodded. "That's how music works. It shows up when it's needed," he pointed to the card. "Did you call them?" She shook her head. "No, I can't. I'm not professional." He leaned forward. "Emily, do you know why people came today? It wasn't because of perfection, it was because of feeling. You made them feel something real. And that's what every great musician does." She looked down, playing with her apron string. "But what if I fail?" she whispered. He smiled. "Then you'll fail beautifully. And try again." The next few days she kept the card close but didn't call. She continued playing in the cafe after shifts, her music soft but full of wonder. Even customers who came for takeaway would linger by the door, listening. The cafe became known around town as the Melody spot. Posters went up. Local bloggers mentioned it. And one evening a small crowd gathered outside, pressing their faces to the glass just to hear her play. But fame also brought pressure. Emily began to feel it. Her hands would tremble before each song, afraid she wouldn't live up to what people expected. "What if they realize I'm just a waitress pretending to be something else?" she asked Lisa one night. Lisa shook her head. "You're not pretending, Em, you're remembering." Those words stayed with her. One late night when everyone had gone home, Emily sat alone by the piano again. Her fingers traced the edges of the keys. She thought of her father, his laughter, his lessons, his words when she was little. "Play for the heart, not for the crowd." She closed her eyes and whispered, "I wish you could see me now, Dad." A single tear rolled down her cheek as she pressed a key, the note echoing softly through the empty cafe. Just then the cafe door opened and the old man walked in, carrying something under his arm, a worn leather case. "I was hoping you'd still be here," he said, setting the case down and opening it. Inside was an old sheet of handwritten music, yellowed with age. "This was my wife's," he said quietly. "She used to play it before she passed. I think it's time someone brought it to life again." He handed it to her. Emily looked at the notes carefully, then began to play. The melody was haunting and beautiful, and as she played, the old man stood by the window, eyes glistening with memory. When the last note faded, he smiled. "Thank you," he whispered. She smiled back. "No," she said softly. "Thank you for believing in me." That night after he left, she finally pulled out her phone, took a deep breath, and dialed the number on the studio card. When the line picked up, her voice trembled. "Hi, my name's Emily. I'm calling about recording a song." It was a small step, but for her, it felt like the start of something bigger, something new. Outside, the moon shone bright over Main Street, and through the window of the little cafe, the piano gleamed under the soft light, waiting for tomorrow, waiting for her. The sun was setting over the city skyline when Emily stepped off the bus, the paper with the studio's address trembling slightly in her hand. The air smelled different here, busier, louder, filled with the pulse of life that never seemed to rest. She clutched her bag close, her heart pounding with both fear and excitement. For the first time in years, she wasn't just going to work. She was walking toward a dream. The studio wasn't grand or glittering. It was tucked between two tall brick buildings, its door marked only by a small gold sign that read, Sound and Soul Studio. Inside it smelled of coffee and old wood. A man with a beard and kind eyes looked up from a mixing console. "You must be Emily," he said warmly. "The girl from the cafe," she froze. "You've heard of me?" He smiled. The internet has, you're kind of famous around here. Her cheeks turned pink. I didn't think people really cared, she said softly. Oh, they care, he replied. You reminded everyone that music doesn't need polish. It just needs heart. He led her into a small room with a grand piano that gleamed under warm lights. So, he said, let's hear what made a town stop and listen. Emily sat down, her palms sweaty. The seat felt heavier than the cafe stool, and the silence of the studio seemed thicker, more demanding. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and began to play. The same melody she had played the night the lights went out, but this time, she poured into it everything she'd been holding back. The fear, the hope, the exhaustion, the fire, the ache of years spent waiting when the last note faded. The room stayed quiet for a long moment, then the man said softly, That was beautiful, Emily. She looked up, unsure. You think so? No, he said, smiling. I know so. He adjusted his headphones. Let's record it properly. And just like that, she spent the next few hours in a blur, recording, listening, replaying, her fingers aching but her heart alive. By the time she left, the sky had turned deep blue. She carried a small USB drive in her pocket. Her first recording. Something real, something she made. She stopped by a park bench outside and sat down, staring at the city lights reflected in the puddles. She whispered to herself, Dad, I did it, and smiled through tears. Days turned into weeks. Emily returned to the cafe, but now everything felt different. She still served coffee and cleared tables, but customers began recognizing her not just as a waitress, but as the pianist from the recording. Someone had uploaded her song online, and it was spreading fast. People shared it, tagged her cafe, and even local radio stations played it late at night. Mrs. Green cried when she heard it on air. That's our girl, she said proudly, hugging Emily tight. Lisa teased her. You better not forget us when you're famous. Emily laughed. Famous? I still burn toast, but deep down, something inside her glowed brighter each day. Then one morning the old man came back, his step slower this time, but his smile still strong. I heard your song on the radio, he said. You made the city stop and listen? Emily's eyes filled. I couldn't have done it without you, she said sincerely. Nonsense, he replied. You just needed a push. The rest was always yours. He sat down at his usual seat, and as she poured him coffee, he said quietly, You know, my wife used to say that music is a promise we keep for someone we've lost. Emily looked up, her heart tightening. Maybe, she said softly. That's why I play. They sat in silence, both knowing what those words meant. That evening, as the cafe closed, Emily received a call from the studio. We want to feature your song at a local concert next week, the man's voice said excitedly. Just one piece, one chance to perform live, and are you in? Her hands shook. Yes, she whispered. I'm in. When she hung up, she stood frozen in the middle of the cafe, everything around her, and the chairs, the smell of coffee, the faint sound of rain, felt like a memory wrapping around her one last time. Lisa peeked from the kitchen. What happened? Emily smiled. I'm going to play on stage. The next few days were a whirlwind. She practiced late into the night, her fingers sore but her heart stronger than ever. Each time she played, she could almost hear her father's voice. Keep going, Em. The world needs to hear you. And she would whisper back, I will. On the night before the concert, she walked into the empty cafe and sat at the piano one more time. Her fingers hovered above the keys. She whispered, Thank you for everything. To the piano, to the cafe, to the people who had believed in her. And then she began to play, soft, soulful, a farewell melody that drifted out onto Main Street, where strangers paused under the streetlights just to listen. In that quiet, golden-lit cafe, a waitress had become something more, a storyteller, a musician, and soon, the world would hear her story, note by note. The concert hall shimmered with soft golden lights, rows of seats stretching out into the dim glow of evening. Emily stood behind the curtain, her hands cold despite the warmth of the stage lamps. She could hear the hum of the audience beyond, laughter, whispers, the rustle of programs. Her stomach fluttered with nerves. She had served coffee to people all her life, but tonight she was going to serve them something far more terrifying, her heart. Backstage, the studio manager, Mr. Carter, gave her a reassuring smile. You'll be fine, he said. They already love your music. They just don't know it yet, she nodded weakly. What if I freeze? Then start again, he said simply. Real musicians don't fear silence, and they use it. His calm voice steadied her, and for a moment she remembered the old man's words. No one is just anything when there's music inside them, when her name was announced. And now, please welcome Emily from Main Street Cafe. The applause felt like thunder in her chest. She took a deep breath and stepped into the light. The stage looked enormous, the grand piano gleaming under the spotlights like a mirror of every dream she had once buried. She walked toward it slowly, each step echoing in her mind like a heartbeat. As she sat down, her reflection shimmered faintly on the piano's surface. The audience quieted, the air heavy with expectation. Emily placed her trembling hands on the keys for a split second. Fear whispered in her ear, "You don't belong here, you're just a waitress." But then she remembered the smell of coffee, the laughter in the cafe, the sound of rain that night the lights went out. She remembered the old man's faith and her father's smile, and she began to play. The first note was soft, hesitant, then another and another, until the melody unfolded like a sunrise, slow and golden. Her music told a story not of fame or perfection, but of a girl who cleaned tables, who dreamed in silence, and who one night dared to touch a piano. Every chord carried emotion. Every pause spoke of pain, love, and hope. She poured her life into the keys, forgetting the crowd, forgetting everything except the sound that lived inside her. Halfway through the piece, she saw a familiar face in the audience. The old man sitting in the second row. His eyes bright with pride, he gave her a small nod, barely noticeable but powerful enough to steady her heart. She smiled faintly and continued playing, stronger, freer, the melody rising like a tide, washing over the hall when the final note rang out. It lingered in the air, long, trembling, alive, then silence. And in that silence, Emily felt tears welling up. Had she done enough? Had it meant anything? The uncertainty lasted only a heartbeat before the applause began, slow at first, then louder, then rising into a standing ovation that shook the hall. People whistled, cheered, some even wiped their eyes. Emily sat frozen, overwhelmed, her hands trembling above the keys. Then she stood and bowed, her vision blurry with tears. For a moment she caught sight of the old man clapping harder than anyone, his smile wide and unguarded, and she realized this was it. This was the moment she had been playing toward her whole life. After the concert, people gathered around her backstage, journalists asking questions, music teachers congratulating her. One woman even said, "Your song reminded me of my late husband, thank you." Emily could barely speak. She smiled, shook hands, and answered politely, but her heart was still on that stage, somewhere between the first note and the last. When she finally stepped outside into the cool night air, the city was quiet. She walked alone down the sidewalk, heels clicking softly. In her pocket was a folded photograph, her father at the piano, smiling. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "I did it, Dad," and the stars seemed to twinkle brighter, as if answering her. The next morning, the cafe was busier than ever. Mrs. Green had decorated the counter with little newspaper clippings about the concert. "Our girl makes headlines." One headline read, "Lisa ran to hug her. You were amazing, Em." "Everyone's talking about you," Emily laughed. "You watched?" "Watched?" Lisa grinned. "We live-streamed it right here." The whole cafe cried. But amidst all the praise, Emily's eyes kept searching for one face, the old man. She wanted to thank him, to tell him how his faith had carried her. Days passed, but he didn't return. One evening, a letter arrived. Handwritten in neat, careful script, "Dear Emily, I watched you become everything I knew you could be. My health won't let me travel anymore. But I wanted you to know. You've done what music is meant to do. You've healed people, including me. Keep playing and never forget where it started. A little cafe, a storm, and a girl brave enough to touch the piano." With pride, Henry, tears slipped down her cheeks as she read. She placed the letter gently inside the piano at the cafe, tucked between the keys like a promise. She sat down, her hands steady now, and began to play softly. A new melody, one that felt like goodbye and thank you all at once. The cafe filled with music again, warm and alive. Outside, Main Street glowed in the evening light, and through the window, anyone passing by could see her. No longer just a waitress, no longer just a dreamer, but a woman who had found her voice in every note she played. Winter came early that year, snow dusting the windows of Main Street Cafe like powdered sugar. Emily stood by the piano, her fingers brushing over the cool keys. It had been months since the concert, but her name still echoed through the city. Local papers called her the waitress who played her way into hearts. and music schools had sent her invitations to perform, teach, even record more songs. Yet here she was, back in the cafe, where everything began. The morning rush came and went, and as the door chimed one last time, she found herself alone. Just her, the quiet hum of the heater, and the old piano. She played a few soft notes, the melody drifting like snowflakes. She thought of Henry, the old man who had believed in her before anyone else, and the letter he had sent, still tucked inside the piano lid. Every note she played now felt like a conversation with him. Lisa entered carrying a box of holiday decorations. "You know," she said with a grin, "you could be out there touring with real musicians, and here you are. Still making lattes?" Emily laughed softly. "I like it here. This place has music too." Lisa rolled her eyes playfully. "You're impossible." But she knew what Emily meant. The cafe wasn't just a workplace, it was her heart's home. The first stage she ever had that afternoon. As the snow thickened outside, a group of children came in, their teacher explaining that they were from the local music class. "We heard the story of the waitress who became a pianist," one little girl said shyly. "Can you play for us?" Emily smiled warmly. "Only if you promise to listen closely." The children nodded eagerly, so she sat down and began to play. The tune was gentle and playful, filled with the innocence of childhood. Laughter rippled through the group as she added a few extra flourishes, their faces glowing in the reflection of the piano's shine. When she finished, they clapped wildly. Their teacher said softly, "You've just inspired them more than any lesson I could give." Emily's eyes shimmered. "Then that's the best concert I've ever played." As the children left, the cafe felt different, lighter, warmer. She realized something then. Music wasn't about where she played. It was about who it reached. The old man had said she'd heal people with her music, and now she was starting to believe it that night. She got another call from Mr. Carter at the studio. "Emily," he said, "there's a charity concert next month. For children's hospitals. They want you to headline it." She hesitated. "Me? Why me?" "Because your story moves people," he replied. "You make them believe that ordinary lives can make extraordinary sounds." His words lingered long after the call ended. The following weeks were filled with rehearsals, interviews, and planning, but Emily still came to the cafe every day. Even when the world saw her as a musician, she refused to forget where her melody began. She still wiped tables, still smiled at customers, still played the piano when no one was watching. Each note now deeper, wiser, more grateful. On Christmas Eve, the cafe held its biggest night ever. The crowd spilled out onto the street. Carolers sang outside while families huddled in warmth. Emily sat at the piano, the lights dimmed, and for a moment, it felt like that night long ago. The storm, the blackout, the silence before the first note. She smiled, remembering it all. She began to play her newest song, one she had written herself, a song about beginnings, about courage, about finding light in dark places. The melody flowed rich and emotional. People swayed, some closed their eyes, some wiped tears quietly. Lisa stood by the counter, whispering, "That's our girl." Mrs. Green clasped her hands and murmured, "She's home." When the final note faded, the cafe erupted in applause, but Emily didn't stand immediately. She kept her hands on the keys, eyes closed, letting the sound fade gently. Then she looked up and whispered, "For Henry," her voice barely audible, but somehow everyone seemed to feel it. The room grew still, full of something larger than applause, gratitude, love, memory. After the crowd left and the snow fell heavier outside, she sat alone again, the piano light still glowing softly. She reached into the lid and pulled out Henry's letter, read it one more time and whispered, "I kept my promise." She pressed a hand over her heart, then closed the piano slowly, its final echo ringing like a heartbeat. Outside, Main Street glowed beneath twinkling lights, and people passing by could still hear faint music from the cafe, soft, peaceful, timeless, a reminder of one woman's journey from serving coffee to touching souls. Emily smiled through the window as snowflakes danced around her reflection. She was no longer just the waitress who touched the piano. She was the music itself, living, breathing, eternal. Spring arrived on Main Street with the scent of rain and blooming lilacs. The snow had melted, the cafe windows were open again, and sunlight streamed in, warm and gentle. Emily sat at the same piano, the one that had once gathered dust, her fingers tracing its edges with a quiet familiarity. She had played on grand stages now, traveled to new cities, met people who called her a rising star, yet every time she came back here, To this little cafe, she felt truly herself. It had been a year since that stormy night. The night everything changed. The night a waitress had touched the piano and found her voice. Now, she wasn't just a local story. Her music was played on radio stations, featured in magazines, and her video from the concert had millions of views online. Still, fame never replaced the feeling of peace she found here. Among the smell of coffee and the hum of quiet laughter, Mrs. Green bustled around, rearranging flowers on the tables. "You know, Emily," she said, "we're thinking of renaming the cafe." Emily looked up curiously. "Renaming?" "Mm-hmm," Mrs. Green said, smiling. "We were thinking, Cafe Melody, what do you think?" Emily blinked, speechless for a moment, then smiled softly. "It's perfect." Lisa came out carrying a box of fresh pastries. "Hey, superstar," she teased. "Any chance you'll autograph one of these croissants before heading to your next concert?" Emily laughed. "Only if you promise to frame it." The laughter between them was easy, familiar. The kind that only comes from people who've watched you grow, stumble, and rise again. Later that afternoon, a young man entered the cafe, holding a small camera and wearing a nervous smile. "Excuse me, are you Emily?" he asked. She nodded politely. "Yes. I'm doing a short documentary on people who change their lives doing what they love," he said. "Could I film you playing?" "Just a few minutes?" Emily hesitated, then smiled. "Sure. But only if you promise to order coffee first," he laughed and agreed. She sat down at the piano, the camera recording quietly as sunlight painted gold patterns on her hands. She began to play a soft, tender tune, one that wasn't about fame or success, but about home, about moments that changed everything, about gratitude when she finished. The young man said softly, "That was beautiful. What do you call it?" She smiled. "The cafe on Main Street." As the man packed up his camera, an elderly woman approached Emily, tears in her eyes. "My husband loved your song," she said. "He was sick for a long time, but your music gave him peace in his final days." Emily stood and hugged her gently. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means more than anything." When the woman left, Emily sat back down, overwhelmed, realizing again what Henry had once told her, that music wasn't about perfection. It was about healing that evening. As twilight settled outside, the cafe grew quieter. Only a few regulars remained, sipping coffee and listening to her play. One by one they left until only she remained. The streets outside glowed under the soft light of street lamps. She opened the piano lid and took out Henry's letter again, the edges now worn from how often she'd read it. She smiled through a tear. "You were right." "Henry," she whispered, "music really does heal." She placed the letter back, closed the lid, and began to play one final melody. Not one from memory, but one she made up in that moment, raw and full of life. Her notes carried through the open window, drifting into the night air across the quiet street, over the heads of strangers walking by and into the stars above as she played. She remembered everything, the laughter, the fear, the applause, the first time her fingers trembled on the keys, and the moment she realized her life had changed. She remembered her father's voice saying, "Play for the heart," and Henry saying, "No one is just anything when there's music inside them." Their words danced between her notes like invisible harmonies. When she finished, she sat still for a long moment. The last note fading like a sigh, she smiled quietly to herself, looking around the cafe that had become her stage, her home, her story. Outside, a group of children walked by, stopping to listen through the window. One little girl whispered, "Someday I'll play like her," and Emily's heart melted. She whispered under her breath, "Then my music has done its job." She stood up, switched off the lights, and turned back once more to the piano. Bathed in the soft silver glow of the moonlight, she touched the keys one last time and smiled. "Thank you," she said, not just to the piano, but to every moment that brought her here. Every person who believed, every silence that became music. As she walked out, locking the door behind her, the faint echo of her final song lingered in the air, flowing down Main Street, mingling with the wind and the scent of spring. The cafe lights dimmed, but the melody stayed alive, whispering softly into the night. A story about a girl who was once just a waitress, until she touched the piano and the world never stopped listening.